This is Casual Babble.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. This is Casual Babble and I'm your host BC Babbles. Hope you're doing well. If you were here for the last episode, we hopped onto a train with a recently very viral moment from Jubilee, specifically one of their recent episodes of Surrounded with Mehdi Hassan, where he faced down a confirmed fascist and Nazi ideology sympathizer. But we took that moment, instead of just ingratiating on the toxicness of it, we moved it into discussing the importance of, as an employee, understanding your employer's culture and how that should prompt you, doesn't always, but should prompt you to really be responsible for your public conduct, especially when you're going to be going onto a digital platform for a YouTube channel that's been going for over a decade that has millions of subscribers, and you're definitely, whatever you do is going to be seen by millions of people. So we talked about that. And granted, that's something we could talk about for a while because that's definitely my wheelhouse. And again, if you saw the last episode, I came very forward about how I messed up about 3 years back, doing something in a similar wheelhouse. No, I'm not a fascist. No, I'm not a Nazi ideology sympathizer, but I was very stupid on my podcast 2 years ago, and that got me in trouble. But I wanted to take today to move into another realm that this incident definitely touches on, which is cancel culture. You know, it's a term we've heard countless times over the past decade, but I really want to dig into what it means and, you know, the differences between cancel culture and consequence culture, right? I think there are two inherent differences there, and I think it's important to understand what those are and maybe when to invoke one or the other, right? Before we do that, if you're watching on YouTube, please give us a follow, comment, and like. It really helps out the show. If you're streaming somewhere, give us a follow if you can. Give us a like there too if it's capable. And subscribe to our newsletter on casualbabble.com. Keep up with us. And if you want to be a guest, be sure to catch up with us on Podmatch. That's our newest platform we hopped onto recently. We've gotten a bunch of requests for guests after only being on there for a couple of weeks. So if you're an entrepreneur or you in some way, shape, or form support entrepreneurship or innovative thinkers, growth-minded trailblazers, you should be on the show. Hop onto Podmatch, connect with us, and we'll get you on the show. So, cancel culture. I was curious to actually want to figure out like where the origin of the phrase comes from, and I'm pretty happy with what I found. So I found an article from access.org that talks about where the phrase came from. So funny enough, it says the initial use of the word cancel in the way that we use it now goes as far back as the 90s, a movie called New Jack City. However, it wasn't until the 2010s, specifically after a 2014 episode of Love and Hip Hop New York, where the phrase canceling somebody actually truly was born and took off. Specifically, a character broke up with his girlfriend saying that you're canceled, and that phrasing, that usage, took off on Black Twitter, and of course, eventually that was appropriated by everyone else. I know, this is a moment where we should really appreciate how much Black folk and Black culture give everyday people when it comes to like day-to-day verbiage uses of countless words. Just in case you're wondering what I mean, the fact that we sometimes refer to other people as bro or man, or we use the word man as a pronoun, or bro as a pronoun, that's thanks to Black culture. But it's such common use these days, we don't realize that. So, Black culture, thank you. But that's where the term cancel culture comes from. Thank you, Love and Hip Hop New York, and thank you, Black culture, for that particular verbiage use of the word cancel. So what is cancel culture, right? So, you know, clearly it's whenever someone either does something publicly stupid, aka what we discussed last episode, or even not even just that, it can be someone who's curious enough about somebody who goes and researches them, finds something random from their past and brings it to the forefront and makes a whole new deal about it. And we can get into that a little bit too, because I think that can be a double-edged sword in a way. Granted, the people who do this research don't usually show themselves, which I think is kind of a cowardice thing to do. I think if you're going to do that for the sake of clout, you should be willing to be seen for it, because there's a good chance that what you find in someone's past does not speak to them currently. People can grow. People who want to grow can grow, and a lot of people have. So if you pull something from their past that does not speak to who they are at all anymore, that's you showing your ass, just letting you know. But cancel versus consequence culture, right? So I would say, by definition, between cancel and consequence culture, consequence culture would be more of the objective system of events that are triggered by someone's public conduct or something being revealed about somebody, right? So we spoke last week about individual from that Jubilee episode who confirmed certain very not good things about themselves that they were very, very proud of. If you watch the last episode, I do have a video clip and a screenshot in there too. But and of course, what do we understand is that what we've heard is that they've lost their employment because in this day and age, people are very willing and capable of taking someone and doing research to find out who they are really, what their name is, where they live, who their employers are, and will have zero issues calling up their employer and making the employer very aware of a certain incident, a very public incident regarding one of their employees. So, but consequence culture, I would say, is, the objectively, someone does something stupid publicly, their employer finds out, their employer realizes that does not fit with how that company wants to be publicly engaged, so they cut their losses, that person loses employment. Where I would say cancel culture is more what the masses of social media do subjectively to try to pretty much neutralize every facet of someone's life. And I think we've gotten to a point where cancel culture sometimes looks for just a reason to happen, even if that reason post facto, in hindsight, wasn't really a good enough reason. I think cancel culture started with a good reason, but I think it's definitely expanded to where it will just happen to happen for the sake of happening, for the sake of the people having a new bad person to hate. And I think that should definitely change. But, I think we should consider an alternative to canceling depending on the situation. I don't know if I would say this situation we spoke of last episode is one of those, but I think an alternate that should be considered is calling out versus canceling. There's always a chance that when someone has a public misconduct or conduct that's not ideal, that it's not always on purpose, it's not always through bigotry or arrogance or entitlement. Sometimes it's a misspeak, sometimes it's simply someone not being fully aware contextually of what's going on, or it can really just be an accident. So I think we should, as a culture, try to implement certain stratagems that help us understand the real prompt of what occurred. Because I think if it's someone who made an honest mistake, they should be called out for sure. Everyone should be held accountable, but that should provide them the opportunity to retract or speak on it, give their piece, acknowledge it, and, try to abate the masses so that, again, their entire existence isn't neutralized by the masses on social media who are trying to cancel them. And then, of course, canceling is just, almost at this point, shoot first, ask questions later. So,
I guess, broad overview, the actual exams are a long, strenuous process. There's when I was going through them, there was 8 total exams. The first 5 were all like multiple choice. But then the upper level, the three upper level, you kind of had to pick which, kind of like a major. Like some of the actuaries go property and casualty. Some of them do more life and annuities, which is what I did. Some are more on like hedging and like the more asset side. But the upper level exams, you kind of like pick a major and they're written. So it's a little bit more subjective, a little bit more of a black box. I had trouble acclimating to that structure, going from just the multiple choice, just doing math problems, which is what my forte was, to more writing, a lot of memorizing just laws. It was more like law focused. And some of the rules are very arbitrary. Like, this is the interest rate that is allowed for this type of reserve. So it's a lot of just memorizing the rules in a sense. So I had trouble with that. And since I was brand new to the city, I was trying to make friends. And I just felt like I wasn't doing a great job at anything. And it kind of just like broke. Like 2016, I had been in that role a year and a half. I get a call into my boss's office saying they're firing me. And in some ways I was kind of relieved because I felt like in my heart, like it wasn't work. Like I felt something wasn't working.
Yeah.
With that break, I decided to take what I now call my roots trip, where I went to see like where my grandparents grew up, Poland, Hungary. I went to Prague in the Czech Republic, and I actually drove to Vienna, which is where I met my now wife, oddly enough, on that trip. So it was just a 2-week trip, but I went to like Auschwitz outside of Krakow in Poland, which my grandfather grew up in Krakow. So, and during this whole time, I started to read during this break. I had not liked reading growing up. I definitely gravitated more towards the numbers. And but looking back, I think it was more so the books they were trying to have us read, like the Shakespeare, the classics. I wasn't vibing with it. But on that 2-week trip, I started to read a lot. I had a lot of questions on Auschwitz, so I bought a couple books in the Auschwitz bookstore, and then I just started reading, and then those books turned into soccer books and turned into some real estate and personal finance books. And that was really the time where and after my brother had started house hacking, I also, after reading and thinking about it more, I was like, as soon as I get another job, I'm going to buy a house and rent out the rooms in it. And that's kind of where I was led.
So the importance about So the important thing about cancel culture versus, consequence culture. Cancel culture is about immediate blame, this person's done this thing, we don't want this person anymore, this person needs to, for lack of better phrasing, just disappear. Consequence culture, not the same thing. So again, I think consequence culture is kind of the objective side. Someone does something and certain objective sequences of events happen as a result. Like maybe they lose their employment, or maybe something else happens that's just, as a result of this looks really, really bad. This affects this other person or this other entity, and this entity has to respond somehow. But what's important to know, it's not about silencing somebody who does something wrong. It's about pushing them to take ownership of it. So for those of you who didn't watch the last episode yet, firstly, do it. Secondly, what I talked about is that a couple years ago, I made a fool of myself. I facilitated a podcast conversation that involved my workplace at the time. I allowed it to get really toxic, really non-productive, which is my usual direction for the show. And I was stupid enough to produce it and let it air. And even though it was ultimately only live for like 2 hours, I got around enough and I got in trouble. Now, the thing is, it's a moment for me that I realized immediately was a moment where I needed to grow, because there was a definite level of immaturity that led to that moment actually happening. So what I did in the moment was take that opportunity to grow. At the time, I had to speak to a higher up who was kind of known for being kind of a hard ass and did not, people were kind of scared of this person typically. But because I knew it was all my fault and I wanted to, and I had two people on the show who were also coworkers that were also on the chopping block because of their association. And I decided, you know what? I don't want them to get fired for it. So I'm going to have a second conversation without the shield that was my supervisor, who was very supportive of me at the time. And I want to confront this higher up solo and say, hey, I understand what I did. This was my mistake in this way and that way. I gave them the mics. I did not control the conversation properly enough. Please do not, if you have to send me away, I understand that. Don't fire them though. That wouldn't have happened unless I did not bring them in, unless I did not, control myself enough to make sure that what we discussed was done so in a productive manner. But ultimately, I chose that moment to take ownership. And because of that, it softened the reputational blow that I had. Still got fired, and unfortunately, the hard ass was too much of a hard ass to not fire the other two. So 3 of us got fired that day. Granted, I heard that the company's not doing very well anymore. That's a side comment. But the point is, in those moments where it's literally someone can recognize they did something wrong and they want to make amends, they want to own up to it, that's when we should consider, okay, maybe this isn't about canceling, maybe this is just about calling out, because if we call someone out and they have the not confidence, but if they have the merit to the character to own up to it and, kind of soothe things over with the masses, why not let them? If it's someone who's looking to honestly grow, why not let them do that? So and the reason we have to ask that question is because there's a lot of confusion between consequence and cancel culture, right? So, and granted, I think from what I typically see, people who are being canceled, when I look at what's happening, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's not good. But people often claim they're being canceled when they're simply being criticized. Now, again, I don't want to get too political here. Even last episode, I got more political than I wanted to, but this has a feed. So I'm going to delve into politics. Well, not really politics, but like claims from certain parties that should be addressed. So for instance, one of the things that I mentioned is that in the last episode is that a certain political party has for years claimed that their First Amendment right is constantly being suppressed, neutralized, yada yada. When in fact the reality is no, that's never happened, because it doesn't stop anyone from that political party getting up onto a digital platform where they have an audience and still saying something stupid. Their actual issue is not that they're being canceled or that their speech is being suppressed, is that they don't live in a world where they can say something stupid and not get immediately called out or checked by somebody else who disagrees with what they said. And that's not cancel, that's criticism. So the real issue is that you wish everyone else would just stop talking and accept what you say, but we don't live in that world. That's your actual issue. But so I think we need to be, if we're going to cancel someone or if someone's going to be brought into a calling out situation, make it very clear what that is, why that's happening, and why they should take that as an opportunity to own up to what they did and make amends. Because what they will often do is use the word cancel, claim they're being canceled, and actually use it as a shield against being placed in a situation where they should take accountability for something they just did. And so another thing is that this person who spoke with Mehdi Hassan in this episode of Jubilee, he's gone on to other conservative platforms who've been coddling him because he apparently lost his employment. And those conservative platforms are saying that's not fair, that's not cool, how do you feel, coddling him? When in reality, sorry, he went on to a massive platform, showed his ass with what I, again, call a shit-eating grin, and that triggered some pretty big consequences. And simply saying that, and the fact that someone has been able to take the word cancel and use it to protect themselves, because if a conservative person uses the word cancel and says, oh my God, I'm being canceled, that will trigger a bunch of other people on the same side of the spectrum, and they'll come in to protect them. It's like, no, you're not going to be canceled. We got you. We're going to protect you. Sorry. The person did what they did. So, but give them a chance to grow as a person. Again, that is, if you see that, if you realize that there's some growth there that needs to happen, and let them take accountability. Let them be humbled. Let them grow from it. Otherwise they're not going to get any better, and this will likely happen again in the future, and it's not going to change. Before we move on, let's take this chance to hop back into this week's Entrepreneur Spotlight with Jack Allweil, and we'll discuss his journey from being an actuary and his move into the real estate realm. Be right back.
Were you at any point kind of fully bootstrapped in the beginning, or was it always just partial bootstrapping?
I mean, I took the class to get some of the systems in place for mailing, and I would prepare my own deeds and affidavits for the transactions. Because a lot of times, if you were to go to a title company, they might charge you $500 regardless of the size.
Yeah. So
if you're only doing a $1,500 transaction, it's kind of eating into both sides margins. So, once I get to $10,000 in a deal, I normally go through a title company. But a lot of times, it definitely takes some trust on both sides. A lot of times I'm having them sign a purchase sale agreement, and I'll send them half the money before recording and then half the money after. It seems a little less, it is a little bit wild, I think, when people hear it, or they think it's kind of a wild type of transaction, that wait, you're sending money to a stranger.
Yeah.
But there's definitely trust involved.
For sure. Now, at this point in your journey, after having built your 13-unit portfolio and having the growth experience you have in land flipping, is there anything in particular that you kind of wish you knew earlier on?
So I would say, looking back, so what I did with those 5 units that I initially bought, they were fully rented, but the properties themselves were not, they weren't super up to par, I would say. They were more like B and C type neighborhoods. The houses themselves were a little run down. I've done some rehabs through the years on a couple of them. But I think, looking back, it might have made more sense to have tried to find a way to buy a house with cash, with the rehab budget included, and then fix it up on the front end, and then refinance out to pull your cash out and then go do it again. Because once you have tenants in there, it does become a little, I found it hard to make the decision to kick someone out to do a rehab. It doesn't, and if they're not complaining about the living situations, so I guess maybe I would have saved up money earlier before I got going. But there's definitely pros and cons to both, because I was also able to start sooner, and I kind of got some feedback from that. So now I could get out or refinance out the cash, but I think I might have changed the order in which I did things.
And coming back out of our Entrepreneur Spotlight with Jack, he was a great conversation. He's also on Podmatch, so if you want to talk to him about anything relating to your podcast, Podmatch is the place to find him on. So let's move into our next section of this topic. Again, we're talking about cancel culture versus consequence culture, and we need to discuss public platforms and their relationship to public responsibility. So when it comes to, and I don't want to be limited on how to say this, but we all know that information for us is easily accessible. So, and a lot of people are looking for opportunities to speak their mind, to discuss topics that are near and dear to them, which is great. Public discourse is an important thing. It's one of the great things about our country, that because we can have it. We're not yet in a country where that is not allowed. So what I think we need to keep in mind, though, is that public discourse is okay. That still means you have to be methodical about what you do within that realm of discourse. So clearly what we saw from Jubilee, not great. And I even shared a TikTok today about another person that Mehdi Hassan spoke to, who very undereducated. That this person was very undereducated, and I say that with no compassion, because at this point I got no more compassion for it. Where his claim was white people are Native Americans. No, they're not. That's not what Native means. That's not what Indigenous means. Go home. Stay at home with that. But like, you know, that conversation, that back and forth with his son might also result in that same person being found out and maybe losing their jobs, and part of it's because I think Jubilee has become too comfortable giving people with not okay ideologies to just have a public moment. But I think that's also because, again, the First Amendment is not being suppressed. Because, again, these people are still coming out on these platforms. They're still saying these very stupid things very easily. They just don't like being called out for it. So, and granted, you know, we have social media, podcasts, and group chats that also play the other part of, yeah, they're being called out now, but again, they're also being coddled. There are still those people who are sympathizers for it. Again, the number of people that were clapping, and granted, I'm not that surprised because there was one progressive person versus 20 far-right conservatives, so not super surprised when you had people clapping at the fascism thing, clapping at the Nazi thing, clapping at the white people are Native Americans thing. And if you think a white person's Native American, go home. Or maybe homeschooling is your problem. Go back to public school. And this is why we should not be getting rid of the Department of Education, because clearly it needs a lot of work. But we have to keep in mind that, and again, that's why I kind of give that dichotomy of Jubilee. Initially Jubilee was I thought was cool, because it had its primary bit of content was the common ground, where they brought two different groups of people on two different sides of a polarizing topic and tried to use certain prompts to see if they could connect. That I thought was really, really cool. But again, looking into more recent stuff, it's kind of moved away from that. And again, it's just giving people and their sympathizers who don't have positive or really human-focused ideologies too much of a platform to just thrive and exist. But again, that gets us back into why it's important to concern yourself with how that's being kept online, because this stuff doesn't go away. It's permanent, right? And you've heard it before, at least I've heard of it. You know, companies will do research on you. They will look at your social media. They will look and see how you conduct yourself online before they even welcome you into their family, into their culture. And so I know for me, there was a while back where I'm like, you know what? Earlier on in my TikTok days, my content could be more on the NSFW side, which, as much as I like those conversations, I'm not all about those conversations, not 100%. So I figured, you know what? There are more productive topics I want to discuss. Let's get rid of some of that old stuff and move more into talking about careers, entrepreneurship, voiceover work, all those other productive things. Because again, collaborators and companies are looking at this stuff. They are constantly deciding whether or not, based on what they see from you, if that's something they want to be associated with. And if not, well, that's how you lose a collaboration. That's how you lose a job. That's how you lose opportunities for work and exposure, because you're conducting yourself in a way that doesn't fit with how someone else wants to be seen. So intent versus impact is another thing I want to talk about. And why good intentions don't always protect you, right? So when it comes to intention versus impact, you know, can we look at this moment and think, was there an intent that this person had aside from the very negative impact of confirming fascism and his pro-Nazi ideology sympathy? maybe we could argue he was excited about the idea to just be himself, speak freely. Again, that's never been a problem for the people on that side of the aisle. And that, in essence, is okay to feel like you can speak freely. Not every country offers that. But the impact was far from that more optimistic intent, which we've, of course, seen since the production and airing of that episode. So we have to discuss at this point, what should his course of action be? I don't think going into conservative platforms and getting coddled is the best option for him. I think he and or his family, whoever brought him into that mindset, really needs to consider, okay, you just had someone confirm this, which if you look at the very definition of it, maybe you don't understand what that is. It's not an okay thing. And perhaps you should take this opportunity to consider taking accountability for it and maybe trying to better yourself as a person, because otherwise, again, this will just happen again, and it'll be the same circle. You'll be looking to be coddled, and you'll keep making mistakes, and where will you be after 10 years of the same stuff? Right? And I guess a good question for this as well is, in this world of cancel culture, is redemption a possibility? You know, can someone come back from being canceled? And how is the best way to do it? You know, we've seen so many people, I think a lot of times they happen to be in like the beauty industry, whether or not it's like James Charles or I think Tati is her name, or Jeffree Star. Some kind of scandal happens or controversy occurs, and they try to come out with, you know, an apology video, and I feel like more often than not, it just does not hit the mark. People do not see it and think it's legit. I don't typically watch them. I usually see clips, and the clips that I do see don't seem sincere, really. Especially when coupling with that insincere apology, we have so many other bits from other people who are corroborating the ill-advised thing this person did. So has there been anyone in the past who has successfully come back from being canceled? So looking at WatchMojo.com, one of my favorite content videos, there are 10 times celebrities came back from being canceled. So they include Sarah Silverman. During her self-titled Comedy Central show, she played a woman who decides to be black for a day as part of a social experiment, and she chose to use offensive makeup for the plot. So while the look in the episode was controversial when it debuted, it temporarily derailed her career nearly a decade later. The comedian reported that she had lost out on a role in a film after a representative saw the sketch, and after she expressed regret over the episode, she continued to book various roles in film and television. Although she still made a few boundary-pushing jokes, her apology made it clear she wouldn't participate in a similar sketch again. Okay. Another option here is Nick Cannon. A 2020 podcast recording featured Cannon making several comments that many deemed insensitive and anti-Semitic. He also discussed offensive conspiracy theories that focused on Jewish people. When news of these recordings spread, Cannon was allowed to continue work on The Masked Singer, but his longtime producing partner, Viacom CBS, ended their relationship. This meant the star could no longer host his popular Wild 'N Out show. After the scandal broke, Cannon publicly apologized and met with rabbis and gave money to a Jewish organization. And in 2021, Viacom CBS responded to his efforts by reinstating him as host of Wild 'N Out. Okay. Let's see what number one was. Mel Gibson. A pair of incidents that focused on Mel Gibson almost seemed to spell the end of his career. After saying anti-Semitic comments in 2006, the public heard recordings of him making racist and violent statements to his partner in 2010. Both incidents made it difficult for Gibson to book major roles in any Hollywood project for a number of years. However, after appearing in The Expendables 3, the actor was wildly celebrated for directing 2016's Hacksaw Ridge. The award buzz the film received marked a turning point for Gibson, and the following years he began to consistently appear in prominent roles and speak about plans for future directing projects. Gibson's turbulent history hasn't stopped his work from being widely accepted. So, I think with that kind of input, we can say redemption's possible, but one thing we can look at for each of those examples is that it's not just I apologized and I was forgiven. It's I acknowledged it, I owned it, I apologized, I then put a lot of work into rebuilding myself and reformatting myself as a person, and eventually either doors that were closed off to me reopened, or I found new doors open to me. So, possible, but we got to ask ourselves, will these people, like those who are on Jubilee, actually put in the effort or even recognize that they were in the wrong for responding the way they did? Before we hop into our last section, let's go ahead and see our Entrepreneur Spotlight Jack Allweil once more this episode. Thank you again for Jack Allweil being on our podcast. He was a great conversation to have. And again, I met him on Podmatch. So if you want to be a guest on the show, find me on Podmatch. If you're on YouTube, I'll have a link in the description. Check it out there. So closing out, I want to talk about navigating this culture as a professional or a creator. So one of the things I would say, and I'm even doing this now because this is a touchy subject. So for me, somebody who has a show that's not politically focused, but who's taking the career connections to move into a couple of political oriented topics, I'm trying to be very, this is what I found. I'm not making stuff up, but these are my opinions on things because I don't want to beat around the bush too much and not give you my thoughts on things. But it's something I got to be mindful of, right? So when it comes to me as a creator, do research, make sure you understand what it is you want to share first so that you're providing the context necessary. And, you know, if you have a moment where you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't include this, then don't. Cut it out later. And then as a professional, again, remember, and I said this last episode, if you are applying to a job, you're not just applying to take on the responsibilities of that job, you're applying to take on the culture of that employer. You're not just applying to take on a role, you're applying to join a group. So if you're accepted into that group and you're hired, you're part of that culture. So when you're out there in the world, off the clock, you are still repping that company. So if you're going to go onto a huge platform, you have to be mindful of your conduct. And honestly, if you have a true nature that is very contrary or anti your employer's culture, don't work for them. Make it easier on yourself. But, you know, if you're going to get caught up in something, you know, take a moment to step back, breathe. If you still want to get into something, but do it methodically. Don't be half-assed. Don't be haphazard. Do it with some kind of forethought so that any kind of blip that occurs from it is minimized. And at the very least, you get to go to work on Monday and you still have an income. All right. Thank you so much for being here for Casual Babble. My name is BC Babbles. Again, check us out on YouTube and your favorite streaming platforms. Learn more about me through my Linktree, Linktree/BC Babbles and Casual Babble, Linktree/Casual Babble, and we will talk to you next episode. Have a good night.